So we're live again on Syriana analysis. I think this has become a habit to do daily live streamings, almost, let's say, live streamings on Syriana analysis, especially with journalists, experts around the world, in order to understand what's happening around the world, and not only in Syria or Ukraine, because there are also other important issues. For example, in Brazil, if you turn on your TVs, you will see a big coverage on what's happening in Brazil. Some call it the elections were rigged. The other side says it's an insurrection by the Bolsonaro protesters or pro-Bolsonaro protesters. And that's why I wanted to host Lucas Leros. He's a Brazilian journalist, columnist at Infobricks, CGTN, and Nova Resistencia. Am I pronouncing your name and the outlets that you work for correctly, or I'm butchering them, Lucas?
Work. My pleasure to be here. Yes, my name is Lucas Leiros.
Actually, I also followed you on Twitter, and guys, I put the link of Lucas's Twitter account in the description below so that you can also go and follow him, because in my opinion, Brazil is one of the most important countries. It's one of the biggest economies also in the world, and whatever happens there, it will have a geopolitical repercussions on the rest of the world. Now, Lucas, the general elections were held in Brazil in October 2022 to elect the president, and Lula da Silva received the majority of the votes in the second round and became president-elect of the country. But while Lula da Silva recently sworn in as Brazil's president, protests erupted in the country by the supporters of Bolsonaro. Now, what are the people protesting for, and has Bolsonaro called on his supporters to storm government buildings such as the parliament and the presidential, let's say, palace? Can we call what happened an insurrection?
Yes. So, first of all, we need to understand that Bolsonaro instigated a great atmosphere of mistrust in Brazil about the legitimacy of our electoral process. He and his team, his supporters, have stated several times that they believe in the possibility of electoral fraud. And this has generated national discomfort towards these elections. Many people stopped to believe in the electronic voting system as a safe method to operate elections. But this is very important to note that Bolsonaro did not create this discourse about fraud. This is something that has existed in Brazil since the system was the electronic system was adopted. Interestingly, decades ago, it was the leftist wing which was reporting the supposed existence of fraud, and not the rightist like we are seeing now. The left has always criticized the system because since the system was adopted in 1996, our electoral court has a contract with the American company Oracle for it to count the votes in the presidential elections. So in practice, it is Oracle that says who wins our elections. I can say whether or not that is fraud, but for sure it is suspicious. And curiously, our left parties forgot this criticism and now adopted the discourse that our elections are absolutely safe and reliable. This is simple to understand because when Trump was in power in Washington, and it was interesting for the US to have Bolsonaro in Brazil, the right did not talk about fraud either. But the situation has changed, and has changed there in the United States and consequently here too. So now the rightists say that there is fraud in the elections, and they don't believe Lula's election because of that. And this election, according to the U.S. authorities, is absolutely safe and okay. Victoria Nuland, Jake Sullivan, William Burns, all of them commented on the matter, saying that our elections was absolutely okay. it is really complicated, because Brazil is now very, very polarized because of this. Lula won with a very small margin, and because of this, he's unable to pacify the country. Uh, Almost a half of Brazilians are pro-Bolsonaro, and this is very complicated to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Bolsonaro is a weak politician, indeed, but he has an important populist influence and mass of fanatical supporters. Then the situation got out of control. Bolsonaro supporters didn't accept the results, and alleging fraud, they invaded Brasilia, asking for the revocation of the elections or for a military intervention to to restore the order. So, and I don't believe that Bolsonaro is commenting this movement. I sincerely believe not, because indeed he incited the fury of the masses with his earlier speeches, but he is not a kind of mastermind of what is
Mm-hmm.
happening now. We're seeing a very passionately motivated mass movement uh, with no central command. If it had any central command, they would not have it done what they did on Sunday, because with the adventures of the last Sunday, they gave Lula all the reasons he needed to impose a law and order operation, which will damage the right parties' interests. So I don't believe Bolsonaro is
But
commenting or
Bolsonaro,
anyone.
at the moment, he's in the United States, right? They say
Yes,
he's in the hospital.
yes, yes. He's in
Uh,
Florida, and some Democratic Party people started a campaign to send him to Brazil. But there is no lawsuit in Brazil to make this maneuver legitimate.
Yeah, but
Not
you
yet.
know, the situation is suspicious for the ordinary people, those who like don't follow closely the situation in Brazil or don't know all the details. That Bolsonaro is in the United States and these protests erupt in Brazil. People storm into the government buildings and people start making connections, right? Like what's the odds that he's there in the United States and elections happen and he's been accused of being rigged, similar to the Trump's allegations, for example, and people also stormed into government building. So it's very suspicious, right? Or even if he isn't involved directly in it, it still makes people think about it, that if the United States or the CIA have a preference in this regard. And in this regard, I would like to ask you, like Lula, who is a left-wing candidate and now a president, he received a warm welcome by several Western officials who considered the pro-Bolsonaro protesters and condemned the pro-Bolsonaro protesters and compared them to Trump supporters. And even some of the media outlets called them fascists who stormed the Capitol in January 2021. Now, is Lula celebrated by Western leaders because he came to power in a democratic manner or for ideological and political reasons?
In my opinion, it has nothing to do with democracy. Uh, we can see with all the experiences around the world that the West doesn't care so much about democracy. But Lula came to power adhering to much of the globalist agenda, like green capitalism, LGBT, vaccines, great research, etc. So this shows deep ideological alignment between Lula and some global elites, Western elites. If he is personally really committed to these values or merely ceding to foreign pressure uh, because of pragmatism, I don't know. But these are the facts. Uh, and then there is also a political alignment, as Lula is appropriated to the plans of Biden, Macron, and other Western leaders for Brazil and South America. Right now, we can see this in the issues involving the Amazon rainforest, for example. One of Lula's current allies in South America is Petro in Colombia,
Mm-hmm.
and Petro is literally asking NATO to send troops to protect the Amazon. So
Wow.
yes, yes, he's part of the current conjecture projected by the West, and he's applauded for that. He's praised for that, not for democracy or electoral process. This doesn't matter.
So even in Latin America, this notion that NATO is the savior for the free world is still it's spreading even in Latin America, despite the historical context there. That I always say, if people in Syria should have learned something, for example, regarding the regime change war, regarding the coup d'etats and the intervention of the US and toppling governments through covert operations, they should learn the history in Latin America, which is the backyard of the United States. And now, even in Latin America, you can see there are voices, let's say, pro-imperialist voices, which is, for me, is a little bit weird, because the people have in my opinion, this is like, the people always have a certain level of power, and if it were it not for certain segment of the Syrian population, for example, the regime changer wouldn't have advanced, and this war wouldn't have been continued for almost 12, 13 years now. And the same applies in Latin America and elsewhere. And the other day I was talking to an American journalist, and she said, and the United States always targets the younger people, the youth, from high school and above. And these people who are not well informed about the history of their country, or they didn't live the historical events during their time, and they have been, I don't always like to use the term brainwashed, but it is a term that describes this situation. For example, lots of Russians in Europe, and I can meet them here in Germany, they're more enthusiastic alongside the Ukrainian side and support Ukraine in this war than Russia itself. Although if Russia loses this war, it is an existential threat for Russia itself, which means their own nation, their own history, their own culture and everything. And you can see nowadays that this war is not exclusive for the armies. It's not only a military conflict. There are attempts to erase the Russian language, the Russian culture, literature, even sports, right? So, but despite that, the NATO side is has a very sophisticated tools in indoctrinating the people. So this is why I made a while ago video that why Russia isn't able yet to become a superpower, because of the lack of the cultural pillar of the empire. Any empire nowadays has different pillars, from the military, the economic power, but also the soft power. And the soft power happens through the culture and the values. And in the people's minds, for example, in Europe, up till this moment, Russia is the Soviet Union. And many people do not want the Soviet Union or communism in Europe again. So Russia isn't presenting, for example, an alternative for the people to be impressed. Like, you go to Armenia nowadays, which my ancestors, where they come from, and if you ask, in my opinion, the younger generation between 18, 24, 26, you will see lots of people prefer the European Union over the integration with the Eurasian countries. And why is that? That's because of the media, because of the indoctrination, because of the cultural power of the United States. Although the United States doesn't have a unique culture, right? But still, it's impressive for the younger people, and it's more attractive for them to join the European Union or the NATO camp. And if you talk politics or geopolitics, unfortunately, they don't understand these things, because they just want, we want, for example, a unified educational system, like people can do exchange programs in the European countries. And this is very attractive for the younger people, education and freedom, especially individual freedom. So individualism also, when a younger person just leaves his family, when he's 18 or she's 18 years old, and there was certain level of authority from the family, they want to enjoy their individualism and the individual freedom, and liberalism or neoliberalism is presenting this for them, right? Now, if we go back again to Brazil, you want to comment? Yeah, do it.
They keep the matter going in Brazil, being attractive for both sides. The righteous love the U.S. and Europe and the West because it's modern, because of the new agendas of gender, the leftists, and the leftists also hate Russia and China because these are countries with less modern cultural agendas, where transgenderism and other issues are not discussed yet. And on the other side, the rightists love the U.S. because it's because of the Cold War speech, the Cold War discourse about capitalism against communism, against Russia and China. So both sides are towards the same direction. The West, the United States, Europe, NATO, each one for a different trend, but the same. But the leader is the same. The objective is the same, and we now are seeing this in Brazil with our polarization. The country absolutely divided between these two trends, between these two pro-US, pro-West trends. Once one side, when Brazil becomes part of NATO to protect itself, defend itself against communism, the other side, when Brazil becomes part of NATO to protect the Amazon rainforest. That's the reality now.
Yes. And now, if we see the dynamics of international relations, we will see that there is an absolute hegemony or a superpower, the United States, and the United States has its tools, for example, NATO. They have the World Bank, they have the IMF, and the European Union is like an extension for them, right? In this regard. On the other hand, the other rising powers trying, for example, to find other formulas, the BRICS, the CSTO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And in this regard, Lula vows to pursue a balanced policy towards Russia and closer ties with the BRICS economic group. Shouldn't the collective West be worried about this, in your opinion?
I don't think this is a major concern for the West now, because currently Brazil is a real problem within the BRICS because we have the most unstable and ambiguous positions. And with Lula, the issue did not change so much. He will bring more commercial stability and stop some problems like those we have seen with China during the Bolsonaro government, for example. But he's unlikely to take a step further in the inter-BRICS diplomacy. Lula doesn't have change to deepen Brazilian ties with Russia very much. He condemned the special military operation in Ukraine several times in several speeches. He stated he is against this operation, right? And yes, he also criticized Zelensky, NATO, but he calls Russia initiative an invasion and condemns Putin as well. He says both are culprits and we don't support either side. So Lula's position will be about Russia the most hostile among the BRICS countries, because when we see China and South Africa, India, they are absolutely neutral. They don't condemn Moscow and Zelensky as well. They are absolutely neutral. Lula doesn't have this position. He's condemning both sides. He's playing the game with the two sides, the West and BRICS. And so, honestly, I see Lula as someone the West can count on to dialogue with the rest of the BRICS. He's not a chaotic element, just like Bolsonaro was, but an element of conciliation between the two sides, between West and BRICS. So he changes to act much more in the sense of confirming the BRICS to a role of economic growth in the current world order, but he doesn't seem to be willing to keeping a role of a more relevant role for the BRICS.
So you're not really expecting, let's say, drastic steps or changes from Lula compared to Bolsonaro, for example, that may speed up the global transition to a multipolar system.
No, because when we analyze Bolsonaro, we see that first his foreign policy was entirely pro-US, pro-Washington, pro-NATO. But with Biden coming to power in Washington, he had to change some of his positions. He dismissed his Chancellor Ernesto Araújo, and the next Chancellor Carlos França was a very good diplomat. And so we can see Brazilian position towards Russia as very neutral in several points. Bolsonaro visited Russia some days before the operation, and he did not condemn Russia. So in these last few months, Bolsonaro had a pro-BRICS turn, you see, and Lula comes in the other direction. So I don't see any of that as good for the BRICS. It's good for Russia, for China, for multiple world. They are both politicians who try to make a conciliation between West and BRICS. Bolsonaro was pressured, was forced to adopt this position. And Lula, I think, will also be under a lot of pressure to change the Western interests.
I'm reading on Twitter some of because nowadays there is a lots of talk about the World Economic Forum, right? The Klaus Schwab, especially after the pandemic. I'm reading accusations against Lula that he is supported by the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab personally in the current attempt to move towards tyranny promoted by the WEF, that is investing in global leaders to gain influence over the decision-making process in important countries. I have even seen a video for Klaus Schwab. He admits, this is from 2019, that they are infiltrating the cabinets of the world through the so-called Global Young Leaders Program, and the 50% of the cabinet, for example, in Canada, are from the World Economic Forum and the professionals or the leaders who are graduated from there. What do you say about that? Is Lula more aligned with the WEF?
Yes.
Wow. So it's true, because
Yeah.
I was very, very concerned about that.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. I'm sad to say, but Lula is currently very aligned with the interest of the World Economic Forum. Among Lula's supporters, there are a lot of people linked to the World Economic Forum and all the globalist agencies, such as the Soros or Open Society, which has even condemned today the invasion of Brasilia by the Bolsonaro supporters. So we can see that he's committed to the interests of a series of organizations, globalist organizations, and World Economic Forum's linked organizations. He had to make a series of agreements with these people, with these groups, in order to resume his political career. Last year, Lula became the bat of the globalist groups to defeat Bolsonaro. So, see, I'm not saying that Bolsonaro is an anti-globalist or something like that, but he represents the other side of the coin. Bolsonaro is linked to Trump, to Netanyahu, to the populists, to the conservatives, who are groups currently out of power and in the main Western countries. So the battle was on using the political force, the political persona of Lula, who has an excellent past as president, to remove Bolsonaro. The problem is that the current Lula has a different agenda than the Lula of decades ago, precisely because he had to do these commitments to this growth. So health tyranny increased a lot in Brazil as soon as the first week of the Lula government. The new authorities went to tighten restrictions on the unvaccinated, and in addition, also Lula's environmental focus with the energy transition projects and climate policy, all of this is highlight emphasized day after day. And so, if you analyze Lula's speech about the protesters, you will see that he related the protests with climate and environmental issues in a totally baseless way. Nobody understood what he meant, but in practice, he accused the Brazilian farmers of financing the demonstration.
Wow.
So he can be right or wrong. I don't know. I don't know. But what I really know is that he really didn't have enough information, enough evidence about that to say this at that time. Because if Brazilian intelligence knew so much about the demonstrations, why was it not efficient in preventing these demonstrations? Why did the tragedy happen? So, in my opinion, the progressive governments that will be led by Lula will use the chaos provoked by Bolsonaro supporters to launch a campaign against Brazilian agribusiness because it's a very strategic and key sector of our economy, but it is also a sector that harms Western elites. We have a very complex agri-food agricultural chain. Our farmers import fertilizers from Russia and use these fertilizers to produce soybeans and export these soybeans to China. And China feeds its people with pork meat from pigs that eat Brazilian soybeans. So this is a very complex, a very complex chain, and undoubtedly the Western elites went to destroy it. And breaking this chain is important for the West and the Europe, and nothing better to nothing better than the climate excuse to do it. So this is also another evidence that Lula is indeed serving some of Davos Forum's interactions. So he will use the progressive narrative to advance some of the globalist agendas. And so I'd like to emphasize again, this does not make Bolsonaro better than Lula. They are just two sides of the same coin. That's why I refused to vote in last year's elections. I usually say that the Brazilian political scenario is polarized between these two trends. As I said before, on the one hand, Zionist conservatism inspired by Trump, by Netanyahu and the Republicans, which the Bolsonaro supporters defend, and on the other hand, progressive liberalism inspired by the Democrats, the European Union, the World Economic Forum, which is currently represented by the new Lula, this new Lula. And the second group is now in power, and the first is on the streets protesting. Neither side represents Brazil.
You know, from what you mentioned, there is something very interesting that I want to follow up on it, which is you mentioned that there were accusations against the farmers that they fund the protests in Brazil, and it's mind blowing. This is almost a global phenomenon nowadays that farmers, for example, who were traditionally or historically more embedded with the left wing, the left is abandoning them nowadays, and they are increasingly becoming more aligned with right-wing or conservative parties. For example, the trucker protesters, the truckers in Canada, the left and the liberals, they abandoned them. In Europe, they were the farmers protesting during the lockdowns and the subsidies, the problems that happened here after 2020. And no one came in support for the farmers except for the right-wing parties, which is ironic. It's very ironic that it's an upside-down world nowadays, right? And this phenomena is also, you said, is similar in Brazil. But I want to understand something here. why the Bolsonaro supporters are carrying so much, for example, Israeli flags. Like, why this matter is very sensitive for them? Or why do they feel like they have to support Israel, knowing that there is a huge geographical distance between them? Like, there is no direct interest, right, between them.
Yes, yes. It's highly related with the religious majority of Bolsonaro supporters, uh, who are the evangelical Christians, a very specific sector of Protestant Christians who has an interpretation, has a view about the Bible's Israel, not as the church, but the real state of Israel, the real Zionist state we are seeing now. So they support Israel because it's a religious matter for them. And with time going on, many people started to adopt this speech without analyzing the situation. And now we see people from many religious origins also using the Israeli flag and so on. But this is also related to a merely political issue, which is the alignment between Trump, the Republicans, the American conservatives with Israel. So, as I said, Bolsonaro's main supporters in the international scenario were Trump and Netanyahu. Without Trump and Netanyahu, he's nothing. He had to make a multipolar turn towards Greece in these last few years because of that, because he had no support from the US and all the key partners. So Bolsonaro supporters simply see the United States and Israel as key partners of Brazil, both as in a political, economical way and in a religious way. They think Israel is a kind of conservative paradise.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the reality of the Israeli society. They think that
Mm-hmm.
they are conservatives and they are like that they definitely the same ideas that Bolsonaro says here in Brazil. They don't know the reality about Israel, about the Arabic world, about the fight between Palestinians and Israelis. They don't have any concern about that. They simply have both the United States and Israel as symbols of societies, of conservative societies, and try to use these symbols in order to demonstrate, to expose what they want for Brazil.
Mm-hmm. That's
That's
very
why I say
interesting,
that's
actually.
that's why I say that this mass movement is absolutely uh, motivated by patience, by feelings, sentiments, and not by real political agenda, real political
Mm-hmm.
platform. They don't have any concept. They don't have any project. They don't. They only see the both sides. On one side is liberal in cultural, in religious issues, and the other is conservative. This conservative side loves the U.S. and Israel, so I will support this because the
No,
majority of
it's it.
Brazilian people is conservative. We have a majority of Christians, so yes. That's why the situation is very polarized in an absolutely
Wow,
baseless
wow.
way. That's hard for people outside Brazil to see this and understand.
So this simplistic judgment on international politics is spreading all over the world, and it's not exclusive in Europe or in the United States or in Eastern Europe
Yes.
nowadays. The future is not so bright, my friend, if this is the way the people think and take decisions about this. I'm gonna share I'm gonna ask you the last question, but I'm gonna share this photo with the audience, which is Lula and President Bashar al-Assad, and this was in 2010, before the eruption of the war. And Lula, I think, gave him a medal, Brazilian medal here. I followed the entire, let's say, international community positions on Syria between 2011 and 2022. And I haven't seen that, for example, Bolsonaro made efforts to establish better ties with Syria. Now, do you think this will change under Lula's reign, or Syria has become too irrelevant for Brazil?
Bolsonaro and Lula charge Syria are the really opposite. I don't think that Lula will have a very good position on these issues now because of the situation I previously explained. But he obviously cannot waste all of his international leagues. He will certainly have a friendly policy towards emerging countries than Bolsonaro. And towards Syria, that's the situation because Bolsonaro hated Syria because he's a Zionist, as I explained. The Brazilian right-wing parties are absolutely pro-Israel and against any Arab state. So, but about what will really happen now with Lula in power, I think he will certainly strengthen humanitarian concern towards Syria as well as Palestine and Yemen and other countries. A humanitarian speed. But I don't think he will become involved in deeper relationships with these countries. He will certainly condemn international interventionism. He will call for the world to be to send humanitarian aid, to be attentive to the humanitarian situation in these countries, but he will not use the real diplomacy to make the situation better. Because, as I said, he is another person now. He's another politician. He had to make many agreements with globalist organizations, with Western politicians to regain his political career. We should not forget that Lula was arrested and contained in a lawsuit in Brazil because of corruption, and this lawsuit was removed without a new trial because of some procedural errors. But he is not found innocent of the accusation. So his situation is very fragile. At any moment, if international elites went, they can incite Brazilian judges to reopen his case and try to remove him from lawfare operation. So he's very fragile. He can't risk himself as he did in the past. He needs to be another man now. So the changes is for him to make the ties of Syria better, to improve these ties in the humanitarian sphere, with criticism about interventionism, about human rights abuses, about war, but I'm not sure he will use any audacious diplomacy in favor of Syria or any other country.
That's very interesting. I will share this segment with my Syrian colleagues. There are so many celebrations also in the journalistic and political circles in Syria on the election of Lula. Lucas, Leos, thank you very much for joining me on Syriana Analysis. It was a really pleasure to talk to you and learn from you on the situation in Brazil. I'm sure the audience of Syriana Analysis appreciate your insights and they were looking forward to understand what's happening there. You're a Brazilian journalist, columnist at InfoBreaks, CGTN, and Nova Resistencia.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I always see your work. I like your work very much, and I also invite you to be our guest in our channel in Brazil. Nova Resistência is a political movement in Brazil in defense of multipolarity, in defense of Brazilian anti-liberal political tradition, and we have a long history of supporting Syria, of supporting Armenia. We have we have a very friendly relations with the Armenian community in Brazil, the Syrian community, and so we invite you for an interview.
Thank you very much. I really want to do that. If there is any political journalistic event in Brazil, I would love to come there. I also, I posted a few weeks ago during the World Cup that I support Brazil in the World Cup. There was so many people from Brazil telling me that there is an Armenian community there and they're thankful that I'm supporting Brazil, which I do since 1994, right? Like it's not something new. Guys, I would also thank you for watching this interview. I really appreciate it. If you're new, please subscribe and share this video with your friends and your circle in order to educate them as well. And if you want to support my independent journalistic work, you can become a patron or a premium membership, and or even through PayPal. All the links in the description below. And see you next time.